Hello and welcome to Chapter 6, Cognitive Dissonance and the Need to Protect Our Self-Esteem. In this chapter, we'll be talking about one of the more complicated constructs within social psychology. My students over the decades have told me that this is one that they have a little bit of trouble wrapping their heads around. So I'll start with a Dilbert cartoon. The boss asks, "Why should I hire you as my consultant?" The dog consultant says, "I'll use my special process of cognitive dissonance to improve employee morale." The boss says, "How does it work?" The dog consultant says, "When people are in an absurd situation, their mind rationalizes it by inventing a comfortable illusion." The boss says, "Okay, go do it." So the consultant goes to an employee. "Isn't it strange that you have a dead-end job while you're twice as smart as the boss? Hours are long, the pay is mediocre, nobody respects your contributions, and yet you freely choose to work here. It's absurd. Wait, there must be a reason. I must work here because I love the work. I love this job." The consultant says, "Next." That is the essence of cognitive dissonance. So what we will be exploring here is, why would this work? Because it does. The first learning objective, and I will say before we get into the first part here, I've broken up learning objective 6.1 into 3 chunks. So there'll be 3 separate videos for this. I think they're easier to digest that way. So the first learning objective in this chapter is to explain what cognitive dissonance is and how and why people use it to make sense of their world. How do they avoid dissonance by maintaining, in order to maintain a positive sense of self-image. So if we go all the way back to the very beginning of this class, we talked about those basic motives that drive human social behavior. Maintaining a stable, positive self-esteem is one of those. Seeing ourselves positively in our social world is something that's very motivating for us. So self-esteem, just to remind us all what that is, refers to how we evaluate ourselves in terms of our worth. Our goal is typically to strive to maintain a favorable view of self. And this is especially triggered when we encounter evidence that goes against that, usually happy self-image, or at least comfortable self-image. We have, every day we experience things where we've done something, or we've made a choice, or we've made a decision that may make us look not so great, not nice, not smart, not reasonable, etc. So we have to do a little bit of mental fancy dancing in order to say, yeah, I did that thing, but I'm still a good person. So this drive to believe we are reasonable, decent people who make good decisions, who don't do bad things, and basically have integrity is going to be triggered anytime we do something or say something or think something that goes against any of those principles. So, and this is driven by this basic desire. We don't want to be seen as stupid or cruel or doing absurd things. So we're going to have to engage in some cognitive work to protect that sense of self. So the theory is basically this, that when we are confronted with situations where there's information in our heads that says we've behaved in ways that are either irrational, immoral, or stupid, the theory says that makes us uncomfortable. And the theorists, mostly Festinger, argued that this causes an emotional state that he described as dissonance, meaning that you've done something discrepant from your usual view of self. And that causes, he argued, a physical sense of discomfort. And that discomfort is something we want to reduce. So the goal is to reduce the dissonance that's associated with this feeling. So the discomfort runs counter to our usually positive sense of self. That pain, basically, is something we then want to get rid of. And here's a video from psychologist Carol Tavris, who will elaborate on the theory.
So a few years ago, I was sitting and talking to my very good friend, Elliot Aronson, who is one of social psychology's greatest living legends, really, in social psychology. And Elliot Aronson had worked with Leon Festinger many, many years ago, who was a great social psychologist at Stanford, and who had developed the theory of cognitive dissonance. What Elliot did in his subsequent work was transform that theory into a theory of self-justification. So let me tell you what this is, because it's so important to our everyday lives. Cognitive dissonance sounds like a cumbersome term, but all it means is the unpleasant, uncomfortable feeling we have when two ideas clash with each other. Lewis Black described this brilliantly on the Jon Stewart show at one point when he said, cognitive dissonance is when an environmentalist drives an SUV. Okay? He said you might as well be filling your gas tank with cognitive dissonance. It means you've got two ideas that clash with each other. So, I'm a smoker, and I know smoking could kill me, and it's not good for me. This is an unpleasant state of tension, and we are motivated to reduce that tension. How do we do it? We can either stop smoking, or we justify smoking. We say, oh, the data aren't really very good that smoking is harmful, and besides I'll live a shorter life, but I'll be thinner, or I'll be more relaxed, or blah, blah. So we don't comfortably live with two ideas that clash. What Elliot showed was that dissonance is most painful, and we are most motivated to reduce it when some aspect of ourselves is involved. When the information we don't want to hear is information that clashes with our view of ourselves as being good, kind, decent, smart, and competent. So if I see myself as a very competent person, and now you give me information showing I just did something really stupid, what are my choices? I could say, thank you so much for pointing out to me that I've just done something really stupid. Or I could tell you where you could go with your information and what you could do with that information, couldn't I? Now guess between those two choices, what do most people want to do? They want to dismiss the information. So Elliot and I ended up writing a book called Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me, which is about why we justify beliefs that turn out to be wrong, things we do to other people that are harmful or cruel, decisions we make that turn out to be wrong or foolish. It's because the need to feel that we are good and competent and kind often trounces the information that on that particular occasion we weren't. Now, why we think this is so important is that throughout our lives, as human beings, we're going to hurt other people. We're going to make stupid decisions. We may make the best decision at the time, but it will turn out maybe not to have been so wise down the road. We're going to hold beliefs that the data, the evidence, the science will show us are wrong. And so our goal in this book is to show people why it's important to understand how dissonance works, why it is important not to keep throwing good money after bad, but to step up to the plate and say, you know what, I was wrong on that occasion. Now, what is the information I need to make a better decision next? How do I learn from the mistake I made, not the mistake those guys made? And that's why understanding dissonance, I think, is one of the most central lessons that intro students can get, because it's something you can take with you right out of the classroom, right into your life for the whole rest of your life. Because when you know how it works, you will see it operating in other people and in yourself as well. People spend a lot of emotional energy trying to protect their egos, trying to protect their sense of self, their self-esteem, their feelings of competence, not realizing that everybody on occasion feels stupid or foolish. Everybody on occasion is embarrassed because they've hurt somebody else's feelings or done something wrong. And we don't have enough models in our society at the moment of leaders, of people in general, who are prepared to say, you know, this was a mistake. I'm responsible for it. Let me fix it.
So that's Dr. Tavers's summary of Leon Festinger's early theoretical work, and then her elaboration of it, working with Elliot Aronson to talk about important decision making, but also the minute decisions that we make every day in our regular lives. Festinger argued that dissonance is going to be most powerful and most painful for us when we do things or have thoughts that threaten our self-image. And there are three basic ways that you can reduce dissonance in this context. First, if you do something that's counter to your self-image, you could change your behavior and bring it in line with the thought that you've had. You could attempt to justify your behavior by changing one or the other of the dissonant thoughts that you're having. And third, you could attempt to justify the behavior by adding new thoughts. So here's a simple example. Let's say my mom is calling me, so my phone lights up. My Apple Watch is telling me it's my mother on the phone, and I sigh. and I answer the phone, and I'm really busy that day. And I know anytime I answer the phone to my mother, it's going to be like a really long conversation. So I'm a little irritated when I'm talking to her, a little short. And I'm not being particularly nice to my mother. So inside my head, I'm like, uh-oh, a good daughter isn't short and snippy with her mother. That's counter to my self-image. So why have I done this? My first choice would be to say, okay, I'm going to change the behavior. So take a deep breath and say, call my mother back and say, I'm sorry, I was short with you. What were we talking about? And move on. The second option is to attempt to justify the behavior by changing what you're thinking about yourself. Now, I could go back and review the experience and say, I was just being honest. I wasn't being short and snippy. I was just being honest. And I've had this done to me on more than one occasion when someone has been really sharp and critical in a conversation with me. And then I'll ask them, why are you being so sharp and critical? And they'll say, I'm not being sharp and critical. I'm just being honest. So that's, changing one of the dissonant cognitions. Now, I could attempt to justify the behavior by adding new thoughts. And sometimes this involves saying, well, I wasn't being short because I'm mean. I was being short because my mother was being annoying. So, and let me clarify, I have an excellent relationship with my mother. I'm just working you through an example of how this happens. And I'm sure you can see situations in your own life where you've done these things. Now, dissonance often is aroused when we have had to make choices. So your authors argue that every time we make a decision, we experience a certain degree of dissonance. The alternatives that we are choosing from are routinely not 100% positive. They're not 100% negative. Like right now, I've just gone through a difficult set of decisions. I have an older dog who's in need of some medical treatments that are invasive and difficult and expensive. But I love my dog, so I have to make a decision about this situation. On the yes, go ahead, do the treatment side, there are some positives, there are some negatives. On the no, don't do the treatment. This is an older dog. I don't want to increase her suffering. So it's a difficult decision. And anytime you have a decision-making situation like that, you're going to have some dissonance about it. Now, eventually, you're going to make a choice. And your desire to see yourself as smart, as rational, as a good person is going to be tweaked, because there are positives to saying no to the decision. There are positives to saying yes. There are negatives to both as well. So what we do after a difficult decision is we often ramp up the positives of the chosen option and push down, kind of deactivate the negatives of making that decision. And that kind of adjusts our sense of ourselves as smart, as rational, as good, when we can downplay those negative aspects of the option that you rejected. We call this post-decision dissonance. Post-decision dissonance is defined as the situation where you have dissonance that's popped up after you've made a decision. And the dissonance is caused by the fact that the option that you rejected has positive attributes. So you've rejected it, but there's still positives to the thing you've gotten rid of. Now you feel like maybe that wasn't a smart choice. You need to reduce that dissonance. The more important the decision, the more dissonance there is aroused. I once had a conversation with a friend in graduate school, and she was going through this difficult situation. She'd just broken up with her boyfriend, which was a hard decision for her to make. And she admitted it was a super hard decision to make. But she was feeling kind of icky about it as well. You know, the positives are the relationship was not working for either of them, and they didn't feel good about it. And she didn't feel good about it. She didn't feel like she could continue the relationship. And she had a lot of good reasons for wanting to get out of it. At the same time, she liked the guy. She liked him. She just didn't love him enough to stay in a relationship. So she was feeling really torn. What happened over the course of our conversation was that she started to amplify the positives of her choice while simultaneously amplifying his negative attributes and the reasons why they were negative. And through that discourse in her own head, she was making herself feel better about the choice that she made. Another way that dissonance becomes prominent post-decision is if the decision is both important and permanent. The decision to buy a house is relatively permanent, especially in the age of 20-year mortgages. Just thinking about that, once you've made that choice, it's over. There's no takesies, backsies. You're stuck in that situation. That can be very dissonance producing. Sometimes people who are trying to sell you things will use a tactic that creates what's called the illusion of irrevocability. Salespeople are notorious for this. They're actually trained to use this when they talk about, offers that they're making, discounts that are available, but only for a short period of time. They will often kind of present you with a choice early in the process, and once they get you to make a choice to continue the discussion, that shifts you into a position where dissonance becomes more likely because you've already invested some time. There must be attractive elements to the offer that's being made. One technique that it takes advantage of this illusion of irrevocability is something called lowballing. And it is, in fact, notorious in the car sales business, where you present a vehicle with an opening price. And this is especially the case with new vehicles. So you're kind of brought in and you're in the initial phases of negotiation, and what you're being offered is one price. Then and usually what they'll do is they'll have a paper, it has a price on it, and they'll get you to initial it. They'll get you to put your initials on the page somewhere. And it's not a contract, but it sure feels like a contract. So they've gotten you to make a decision to write your initials on a piece of paper. I dare you, if you go into a car dealership to negotiate and you just say, no, I'm not putting my initials anywhere, that's not a contract. Watch their eyes glaze over because they're just not expecting it. People tend to be pretty obedient in these situations. But once you do that, you've launched the illusion of irrevocability. It's almost as if you've made the decision already. And then why it's called lowballing is you start with that low price, but then all of the other extras get put in. So they're adding dealership fees, they're adding licensing fees, they're adding extras on that eventually can raise the price by thousands of dollars in some cases. But you feel like you've already made a commitment. reneging on our commitments violates our sense of self-esteem. So what salespeople are doing is taking advantage of cognitive dissonance in order to get you basically to commit to a higher price. So that concludes my coverage of the first part of Learning Objective 6.1, and we'll continue the discussion in the next video.